Oliver Stone is a Hollywood producer and director. You might remember him from such films as Platoon, Wall Street, or JFK. But he's also a big fan of dictators and a good friend of Vladimir Putin. Revealing Ukraine, a film directed by Igor Lopatyonok, who also worked with Stone on Ukraine on Fire, is being promoted in Europe and around the world. If you've been searching for one place where you could find a collection of Russian disinformation narratives, look no further, because this film has them all. But this is StopFake, and we broke down the main propaganda narratives and fakes that Stone and company put on the big screen. So let's get to it. Number 1, anti-Russian propaganda. A part of the film focuses on Ukraine's 2013-2014 Euromaidan revolution. They pushed the standard conspiracy theory that it was a coup inspired by the CIA and that Ukraine was awash in anti-Russian propaganda. Now, one interesting note here is that the film says that starting in December of 2013, there was a fake being promoted in Ukraine that Russian special forces were in Kiev and they were ready to use force to disperse the protesters on Ukraine's Independence Square. But the main point is that Stone's film is making is that there were no Russian forces in Ukraine. When Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, Putin would repeat the same narrative that the little green men were local self-defense militias, but not Russian special forces. And again, when Russia invaded and occupied eastern Ukraine, there were no Russian armed forces there either, that members of the Russian armed forces were not in charge. But the evidence on the ground is that Vladislav Surkov, aide to Vladimir Putin, was indeed in eastern Ukraine and was coordinating the Russian invasion. In fact, Igor Girkin, a citizen of the Russian Federation, has already admitted that it was thanks to his unit that the Russians were able to maintain their occupation of Donetsk city. Earlier in June of 2019, conversations between Girkin and Surkov were shown as evidence of their involvement in the downing of MH17, in which Girkin pleads for more material and technical assistance from Moscow, and Surkov assures him that it will soon arrive. But according to Stone, all of this was part of an anti-Russian propaganda movement. Now, the former head of Ukraine's security service, the SBU, Valentin Nalyvaichenko, provided evidence that Russian special forces were indeed on the Maidan in 2013 through 2014. It wasn't a fake. He was called to testify and present evidence during the case of treason against former President Yanukovych in a Kiev court on February the 7th, 2018. He pointed out that Russian special forces were indeed dressed as members of the Berkut, a special unit of Ukraine's Interior Ministry, and that the uniforms were provided by the former Minister of the Interior, Vitaly Zakharchenko, who later fled to Russia. Nalyvaichenko also added they were armed. Oliver Stone, however, wants you to believe the CIA and the Americans were everywhere, and he repeats the Putin lie: there were no Russians in Ukraine. Number 2, the Kirk Straight. Oliver Stone's film repeats the Kremlin narrative that Ukrainian ships provoked Russia in November of 2018 in the Kerch Strait, and that this was orchestrated by former President Petro Poroshenko in order to drum up support for the upcoming presidential elections that were scheduled at the end of April in 2019, 5 months later. Stone gives Putin the spotlight to assert that the Kerch Strait was part of Poroshenko's pre-election campaign to get re-elected. Putin says that the electorate in the east and the south of Ukraine did not support Poroshenko, and that he therefore needed to create an international incident so as to declare a state of war and then suspend the election. This fake was broadcast repeatedly on Russian networks, and that's the key to spotting a fake. In order for disinformation to make its way to be part of the national and then the international discussion, it has to constantly be repeated. And Oliver Stone's film is clearly part of the repeater network. Now, StopFake has debunked this fake several times. Earlier this year, in May of 2019, the International Court for the Law of the Sea rejected Russia's argument that the ships were part of a secret provocation, and therefore Russia fired on and seized 3 Ukrainian ships and detained all 24 members of Ukraine's navy. The tribunal concluded that a secret Ukrainian invasion of Russia was highly unlikely, and Ukraine acted in accordance with international norms and rules of navigation and ordered Russia to return the ships and their crew to Ukraine. Russia, however, does not recognize the jurisdiction of the UN court and considers the proceedings to be illegitimate. And apparently, so does Oliver Stone. Number 3, the economy. The Russian narrative that Ukraine has lost enormously, especially economically, when it decided to pursue a policy of integration with the European Union, is a staple of Russian disinformation. Stone's film blames the downturn in Ukraine's economy on this policy choice, which is ridiculous. The economic downturn was the result of Russia's annexation and occupation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and subsequent invasion and occupation of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Oliver Stone's go-to expert on Ukraine's economic woes is Viktor Medvedchuk. Now, why Medvedchuk? Is it because he's an economic expert in Ukraine? Unlikely. He is, however, one of the architects of Russia's information war against Ukraine, having purchased several television stations that regularly repeat Russian disinformation in Ukraine. Medvedchuk asked Putin to be the godfather of his daughter, born in 2004. The two are quite close, and Medvedchuk is one of the main commentators in Oliver Stone's catalog of Russian disinformation, which makes Medvedchuk a logical choice because he's been one of the main broadcasters of Russian fake narratives in Ukraine. StopFake has also debunked Russian fakes about Ukraine's economic calamities several times. The purpose of this narrative is to convince Ukrainians that the West is an unreliable partner. For example, back in May of 2019, StopFake debunked a Russian fake narrative that was promoted by Vadim Rabinovich that the IMF wants to destroy Ukraine's economy. Rabinovich is partners with Medvedchuk in a political faction called the Opposition Platform for Life. Now, the reality is that Ukraine signed a memorandum with the IMF in February of 2015, and the program is aimed at macroeconomic stability, promoting sustainable growth, and strengthening economic governance and transparency. And as a result of this cooperation, Ukraine's GDP grew from minus 9.8% in 2015 to a positive 2.7% so far in 2019. And reliable economic experts have concluded that the large-scale economic crisis that unfolded in 2014 through 2015 was the result of a significant decline in production that was the result of Russia's invasion and occupation of eastern Ukraine. Look, propaganda films are nothing new. Two of the world's most notorious totalitarian states, Nazi Germany and Russia's Soviet Union, recognized a long time ago that films can be used to convince an audience about something so as to influence behaviors and outlooks by providing cherry-picked content to deliberately mislead you. This documentary by Oliver Stone is the best evidence that he's a master at propaganda films, and if you want to know what narratives Russia's fake factories want you to buy, look no further than this film. That's it for this week. As always, you can find much more dissected disinformation about Ukraine on our website, stopfake.org. Be vigilant and look out for fakes. And if you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, forward it to us for a truth autopsy. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and ring the bell to get notified when our digests are released. I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.